Thus, the significant difference between structural and agent-based conceptions of power lies in the different treatment of peripheral agents, social roles, and background norms and expectations. But in both these ways of thinking about power, despite their important differences, the basic idea of power as a relationship between agents and as the antithesis of freedom is preserved. These frameworks of thinking about power don't help us understand variations in the effectiveness of agency over time or across space, nor do they help us gain purchase on positive effects of power. They conflate the idea of power with the idea of domination. The third set of ideas about the nature of power comes from the work of post-structuralists such as Michel Foucault. This way of thinking about power is less interested in what is power, or where it comes from, or whether it's the property of some agents, something that can be owned or possessed. Rather, the focus is on the effects of power. An important distinction made in post-structuralist writings is between power to do something, or power over somebody. Power over is relational and power to is self-directed, but they are a related pair. In fact, power to is logically and empirically prior to power over. Power over can also contribute to power to and vice versa. Autonomy or its lack is a result of the particular effect of some forms of actions over other forms. So the two important differences of this perspective relevant to contemporary decentralization are that power does not just constrain, but it also enables. And that's partly how power transferred in decentralization reforms allows or increases improvements in capacity of local actors and agents. And two, power is exercised upon strategies or actions to other strategies and actions, not by persons. So it can be exercised through institutions. Decentralized power is about enabling new actions and tasks by new decision-making bodies through new incentives and information and according to new institutional conditions. Autonomy, in contrast to power, has been covered in a more limited literature, and in the context of personal autonomy is often connected to freedom, and with sovereignty in the context of political or institutional autonomy. But what is common to different definitions of autonomy is the emphasis on lack of regulation or supervision of daily tasks and operations within clearly and strictly defined boundaries. Even to operate effectively within limits that are clearly defined, organizations and decision makers require sufficient capacities and powers to undertake what they are expected to accomplish. This is then what decentralization reforms make possible through their wide range of implementation and articulation mechanisms, whether they are institutional, incentive, or information related. So I'm close to my conclusions, and nobody, I think one person has walked out, most of you have walked out yet. So, in examining the relationship between local and central decision-making bodies and agencies, my talk has sought to distinguish between power and autonomy, and focused in particular on the institutional, incentive, and information mechanisms through which central governments accomplish decentralized resource governance. In so doing, it has tried to demonstrate, on the one hand, the multiplicity of the means whereby central governments attempt to articulate with and influence local decision-making, and on the other hand, the common pattern of greater powers but more limited autonomy. Scholarship on these different mechanisms of articulation and influence has tended to view them through starkly different perspectives. One focusing on the primacy of the center, the other on the primacy of the locality. For some scholars, the existence of mechanisms through which governments can influence decentralized decision-making stands for a strategy to maintain the efficacy of central state power, extend the reach of that state. For others, vigorous and systematic interactions between central and local decision-makers are important to ensure effective decentralization and are visible in the greater powers that local actors come to exercise. Based on the evidence used in this review, it's more useful, I believe, to view decentralization as a multifaceted process and to sort its divergent effects and assessments by distinguishing between power and autonomy. The focus on mechanisms for connecting central local actors and organizations helps direct attention to the nature of governance strategies that seek to involve local populations in resource management. It also has the potential to identify the processes through which decentralized governance is made more effective. A focus on how decentralization reforms seek to enhance local capacities and powers often leads some scholars to attach a positive valence to the reforms. On the other hand, scholars focusing on failed attempts to increase powers or on how local autonomy is limited tend to critique decentralization as a Trojan horse. And as a Trojan horse that must be contested through populist or participatory mobilization. And indeed, we find that the cases where decentralization reforms fail to contain local autonomy are precisely the ones where there is local mobilization in favor of outcomes and strategies that were not mandated by designers of decentralization reforms. Thank you.